Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for My Tell podcast. I'm your host, Shepherd the Leopard, or Shep the Snep for short. This is our very first podcast episode. We hope that you will like and or subscribe and come back for more as we do in the future. Today, we have the fabulous guest, 2Chaotic Raccoon. Hello, 2Chaotic.
Hello.
And 2Chaotic, why don't you go ahead and just, let's begin before we start. This podcast is going to be rated, what do you think, Chaotic, for the audience? Just a little general advisory note.
Probably PG-13.
Awesome.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
We'll see where it goes. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. 2Chaotic, tell us about yourself.
So I am an IT person by day. I'm a little bit of a streamer by night. I like to go have a lot of fun with my stream at night. You know, we go out, we play all the fun Digi games. We do the Apex. We do the other shooting games. Nowadays, I seem to become a Minecraft streamer. I do lots of Sea of Thieves with friends. You know, we're kind of all over the place, really.
Oh, nice. So we're going to kind of talk about your life. We'll start back when you were itty bitty small raccoon and work our way up to where you are now. And just kind of talk about how furry has influenced some of that and just other topics. Are there any topics in particular that you're really passionate about, things from your own life that you would like to discuss?
Well, I guess I might as well start with the beginning, you know?
Yeah. I think just for some themes, though, that we were talking, a little bit before, some things you're going to be talking about, just as trigger warnings for anybody that's listening. Some of the topics we'll probably talk about is bullying, ADHD and autism.
Definitely be some of that. Definitely be a lot of that.
Anything else?
Probably talk about kinks here and there.
There we go. We're going to get the full picture of this raccoon, this awesome raccoon. But yeah, so
and I wouldn't go that far.
No, I would. So yeah, what was your childhood like? Where'd you come from? Tell us about your family.
Oh God. Okay, so my cringe life started, several days before I was born, actually. So at the very beginning, a few days before I was born, my mother was involved in a 13-car pileup on the interstate, and the stress from that caused her to go into labor and have me several weeks premature. So I started as a series of unfortunate events, and that's going to be the theme of my life, So I definitely had that happen at the start. We do like it when things are out of our control, and that was definitely something that I did not plan on. So I started out, we grew up in a small town in Indiana, kind of in the middle of nowhere, cornfields everywhere. There's Amish all over the place. It's a nice little quaint place. I guess it's a decent place to raise a kid. I'm not sure it was a good place to raise me, though. I was definitely not a decent kid. But I had a lot of problems.
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Not decent kid? Were you a bad kid? Did you cause problems?
Oh, no, I was definitely the good child. It wasn't me that was causing problems. It was the people around me causing problems that made me cause problems, so to speak. I just did not fit in well at school. I had a lot of problems with the other kids bullying me and not being very, what's the word I'm looking for? Accepting of anything that wasn't the stereotypical redneck, manly man, sports, girls, cars, cool kid stuff. That was definitely not my forte. I was more the kid that was into books. I liked learning. I liked to do new things. I liked Pokemon. I liked Digimon. I liked Yu-Gi-Oh! The other kids thought that was a nerd. And because children are the most vile creature on the planet, they saw weakness and they exploited it.
Can you give an example of maybe a time where you experienced that per se, or?
So as far as elementary school goes, it's kind of one of them things that it was traumatic enough that I have forgotten about most of it. I have purposefully put it out of my mind. It's just gone. A lot of the regular instances of bullying are just a blur into one big trail of people it wasn't necessarily physical stuff. It was more a lot of emotional bullying. Like, people wouldn't dare touch me because then you get in trouble. But, and that was still, we had the kind of school where paddles were still a thing. It was very much the old way of, if you stepped out of line, well, corporal punishment was part of the school regimen. So people they wouldn't include me in things. They would call me names. They would, I had several nicknames throughout my childhood. I mean, I'd rather not say most of them.
No. I mean, you can.
It may not be a good thing, demonetized. Probably not fun to talk about those particular names, because I have a very common rhythmically name that rhymes with a lot of different negative words, unfortunately. So let's just say one of the more benign ones that people would call me all the time is, if you've ever seen the show Rugrats, you have Dill Pickles. Well, that was one of my nicknames in school, for better or worse. That was probably the most polite one that they had for me. The rest of them were slurs. They might as well be.
Ugh.
Curse words, all that fun stuff. But besides name calling, they would do things like hide my stuff. They would, break into my locker, take my stuff out, hide it across the school. And because the teachers couldn't prove that, they would never get in trouble. Or kids would, push me on the bus, things that were out of sight. They couldn't, just regular bully stuff.
So was this like a common thing? Did it happen like all the time or daily almost?
I mean, it was daily. Yeah.
Like how do you?
I mean, I didn't fit in at all.
How do you handle that? Like as a kid, like how do you cope with the constant bullying? Like, was there anything that you could do? Was there anything you could turn to, or did you just kind of turn inward? Like,
I definitely turned inward. My coping mechanism for it was to try to ignore it as best as possible. That was how I was raised. Was you don't raise your hand against somebody unless they raise it to you first. But my coping mechanism was books. I loved books. I probably read every book in our library at school. It was so many books that the librarian at the school actually had me as a page for a while. She would pull me out of class during study hall to come help her, organize and scan and do all the stuff, because I was just there all the time. And my other big coping mechanism at the time was definitely video games, kind of cartoons, that kind of thing. I mean, you get put into a world where, you don't have to be what you are anymore. You can be something else. I keep hitting my microphone.
All right, not to date you or anything, but what were some of those TV shows, some of those video games, some of those books? Any particular ones you remember?
So I'm definitely a millennial. So the first things, were Pokemon, Digimon. I grew up on, Carmen Sandiego, G.I. Joe, Captain Planet, all those fun PBS shows. I didn't have Nickelodeon, so I don't have any of that stuff. But we had PBS, we had the Disney Channel. That was really all the cable we had that I would watch, other than the Weather Channel. Big weather nut. But it was always so difficult.
Yeah. So like you were talking about like things that you would watch and do at home, like home life, pretty good. What was your family life like?
Well, for several years, probably about 12, 13 years, I was an only child. I had a split family. My mother and father did not get together after I was born, and so I'm technically a bastard child, if you look up at the dictionary. So I was unplanned. I came along, kind of ruined my mother's financial life, and she raised me as an only parent. And so we were pretty poor. I came from a really poor background. I mean, we didn't have much. The video games and stuff that I had were all Christmas parents for my grandparents. Like, we had SpaghettiOs, macaroni and cheese every night, Spam. Although I never ate Spam, I didn't like Spam. But
you didn't like Spam? How do you not like Spam?
No. Because even for us, Spam was considered, the poor person's food. So we didn't want to feel poor. So why would we buy and eat the Spam? Well, we'd rather buy SpaghettiOs. We'd buy, God, what was this? Manwich. We had a lot of Manwich. Oh my God. Spaghetti. We had lots of Hamburger Helper. We had lots of, just processed food off the shelf. mom never had time to cook. She worked 3 jobs. So I was kind of left to my own devices most of the time, and unless my grandparents came to get me.
Did you
That's part of the reason why I was so isolated.
did you know any difference growing up? Like, was that just like that was just life? You didn't really understand. It just was for you. It was normal. Or did you kind of know something was off, or you weren't quite, as privileged as maybe some of the other kids, or is that something that you've only discovered until like learning about other people more recently?
I mean, in the moment, I was a kid. I didn't know any better. Like, I just figured that this was a normal situation. Sure, my friends, they all had families. They all had, houses and such. We lived in an apartment. We lived, in rental houses. We lived in shacks, basically. And anytime I would go to any of my friends' house, the few friends that I had, they had big families. They had, they had a pool. They had trampolines. They had, slides. They had cool kid stuff. And I just didn't have any of that. So my grandparents did their best to raise me as their 9th child because they were so close and I had a really good relationship with them. But when it came to my father, since he had joint custody of me, I would have to go visit him every 2 weeks. And he was more or less a neglectful parent. I would go out to his house. He would have like a Nintendo and a PlayStation and whatnot. And that was my friend the whole weekend. If I wanted to do something else, I would go outside and ride my bike into the woods or go walk up a creek or something by pretty much on my own. The neighbor kids would always bully me there too. And that was pretty much it. I didn't really have what people would consider a standard childhood. Like, as far as I am aware, I didn't really have people around. I was just on my own most of the time. And that was just normal for me. I didn't know any better. I didn't know what else was out there. You can't know what you don't understand. So it wasn't until much later in life that I realized, man, my life really was a series of unfortunate events.
So no brothers or sisters, no like super close friends, it sounds like.
I mean, I had friends, but all the friends that I had were kind of the special needs children of school. There's really no better way to put it. They were the other outcasts, and we all kind of stuck together a little bit, but because of our relative issues, like we weren't amazing people together. We had lots of social problems together because that was just the nature of the beast at the time. Everybody had their, learning disabilities, or they had autism, or they had other things that we all didn't really understand as kids, but we just thought it was normal. And looking back, it was kind of the drudges of society banding together, more or less.
Earlier you talked about like some of the TV shows, video games you liked, Pokemon, Digimon. This is just a personal question I have, but which one was better, Pokemon or Digimon?
Oh, that's fighting words. That's a really hard question. I mean, they're better at different things. Like, Pokemon is, cool. I've got, Pokemon I can go out and catch. I can go, do cool stuff. We can have battles and whatnot. Well, Digimon, the partners actually talk to you. Like, if I had to choose one over the other, it would definitely be Digimon.
Ooh, you will cause controversy with that.
And not the first seasons of Digimon, specifically Tamers. That's the best. I'm not gonna lie. That's the best.
That's what everyone tells me.
I will die on that hill.
Awesome.
And you cannot stop me with that opinion.
So Tamers, then, was there any kind of like furry seeding going on there, or was it that you weren't in that phase of your life yet?
I was not anywhere near in that phase of my life yet. Sure, it may have been planting the seeds that would bud in the future, but as for coming to furry itself, I'm not sure that was part of it. It may have made me more amicable to it, but definitely not the full deal. It was more for the companionship, the wish fulfillment, that kind of thing. I wanted to be in that series. I wanted to be there, have the cool friend, go have the cool adventures. I keep hitting my microphone. But
well, especially coming from your point of view, where like you just didn't have that. You didn't have kind of the companionship, or a lot of the other things that a lot of the other kids had, where I'm sure like those shows kind of were able to give you kind of a little bit of an outlet when it comes to those kinds of fantasies of having that companionship, that wish fulfillment, that kind of a thing.
It definitely was. It was, I wanted to be there. I wanted to be doing the thing. I wanted to have fun with people. I wanted, go explore, adventure, all that kind of thing. It wasn't that, I wanted to be them. I wanted to be with them.
So that's like your early childhood. Did things get any better, junior high, high school? Lots of times we hear stories about being bullied as a kid, but then when kids get older, sometimes things improve. They make friends. The bullying kind of stops. What was your experience going up into junior high and high school?
So junior high was rough because when I started junior high, our school system wasn't big enough to have like a junior high. It was all mixed in with the high school. So, we had 1st through 6th as the elementary school, then 7th through 8 or 12 was the high school. And so you were mixed in with everybody. So you had, we still had separate grades. The grades were still in separate classes. But with everybody thrown in together, there was a lot of jockeying for a social position. And the 7th graders always wanted to, make a name for themselves or, do things like that to be cooler to the people above. And the bullying only really got worse. I hate to say it, in 7th grade. But it only lasted until the end of the first semester in 7th grade. Because I actually had some incidents happen where a bunch of girls in the 7th grade decided they wanted to make up stories about me. And their stories kept getting more and more ridiculous until a teacher, overheard them talking about it. And they went and they all collaborated together to tell this teacher this elaborate lie. They wanted to say that I was going into the girls' locker room and, being a peeping Tom and whatnot. But this was a complete fabrication. But the teacher believed them over me, of course. They're a bunch of girls. There's like 5 or 6 of them versus one kid that he doesn't know very well. Like, who are you going to believe? But the problem is there was no evidence for this. Like, the girls' locker room in our school was in the middle of the school. There's no windows. There's only one door in and out, and there was a camera on that door. So they could have went and looked at the cameras at any time and, proved my innocence. But even though I told them that, no one would believe me. No one would actually go look. They would all rather jump to conclusions. It's pretty similar to today's cancel culture. Like, it's just, once people had that lie out there, there was no defending against it. And no matter what I did, everybody wanted to turn on me. Everybody believed them over, me. I didn't have any rapport with people, so I didn't have anybody to come to my defense. And it got bad enough that one of these teachers came and pulled me aside one day after class and said, they gave me an hour-long lecture about how I'm this bad person. I need to stop doing this. And that if they hear about it one more time, that they're going to go to the police and get them involved. And at that point, well, I was really going to be screwed if they didn't look at the cameras at that point. So I missed the bus that day, and I had to walk all the way home and crying to my mother that all this is happening. Like, why are people so evil? And I had a really bad depressive episode that weekend because, I didn't want to have my life ruined by the police and getting involved. It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. Word gets around. And once you're stained in that manner, there is no coming back from it in a small town. And so that very next day, like, my mother changed my schools and I went to a different school. And suddenly I was the new kid. Suddenly no one had any preconceived notions about me. And I just got the chance to start over, and it got a lot better. I made a lot more friends. And while I still had some bullying, it was just they were the bullies that bullied everybody. Like, they weren't just targeting me for no reason. And life really improved at that point on that end. And the rest of my high school.
Oh, just a couple of questions about that. Like, 7th grade, how old are you in 7th grade?
I think I was 13.
So 13, typically,
yeah, I think that was about
that's
13.
the age most boys, they've already kind of started feeling like, hey, girls are kind of, ooh, woo, I want to, like, check them out. Was that, like, a thing? Like, was it, even though you were being blamed for that, did you kind of develop a name for, like, being a girl crazy? Or, like, why do you think that might have started?
I have no idea why it started because I had no interest in girls. Like, I wasn't trying to date anybody. I didn't I know now that I'm ace. Back then, I had no clue. But it was just one of them things. I'm like, why are you making this shit up about me? Like, I have no beef with you. I don't have any interest in you guys. I leave everyone alone. What's the deal here? So, I mean, everybody else definitely was chasing each other, but I had no part in that. I didn't want to take part in it. I didn't see any point in it. I didn't have any interest.
So the guy that probably was the least likely to be peeping on these girls was the one that was being blamed solely because you were different.
Solely because I was the social outcast. I was the isolated, so I was easy to make a target.
Do you know what happened to any of those people? Do you ever just wonder, like, how could somebody do that to another person? Like, willfully lie about a person to just ruin their life, pretty much.
As far as why they did it, I honestly don't know to this day. I don't know what possessed them to do that, other than they were just, in a power trip or wanted to feel better about themselves or something. But I do have my revenge, and that every time I go home, I still see a lot of these people there. Most people didn't escape our hometown. Most of them seem to not be very happy with the way their life has turned out. So I guess there's some slight revenge in that.
Yeah, we'll get to how your life turned out, but it's turned out pretty good. I mean, to me at least, I feel. What would your life have been like, you think, if your mom hadn't stepped in and changed schools? Like, would it have just continued? How are you feeling in that moment? Do you think, like, you could have handled that? Like, would we have a different chaotic at this point if that change hadn't been made? Or was that really just a life-saving event, changing schools?
I'm not sure there would be a chaotic at this point had that continued, had I stayed at that school. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be at that school anyway. I was in our district. I was supposed to be going to a different school, but my mother had kept me at that school because she didn't want me to, lose the people that I had around, like the couple friends that I had that I still somewhat talked to at that point were still there. And it was considered to be one of the better schools in the area as far as education-wise, so she didn't want to pull me out. And if she was actually paying tuition to go there instead of, the free tax school that I should have been going to. So it was a pretty easy decision for her to do that. And at that point, I didn't care anymore. I just wanted it to stop. And had I kept going to that school and had my life continued in that manner, I am fairly certain, knowing what I know now about myself, that I would have gotten more and more depressed and more isolated. And had the bullying continued and, had the police gotten involved or something, even if I had my name cleared, I don't honestly know if I would be sitting here today to be able to talk. Like, I'm not really the kind of person who would contemplate that kind of thing most of the time. But knowing myself and knowing how far low I probably would have gone, I would have either done everything I possibly can to escape that hometown, even if it meant taking a bad decision to do it, or I wouldn't be here. Yeah, I think that's really the only two routes that could have gone.
And that's like a really difficult thing to kind of realize. Obviously, everybody is super glad you're here, and your life has gone from that low point to where you are today.
I like living. Yeah. It's a good time.
So that's a great example of just how, like, lots of times just, it was really rough, but now you're where you are now, and it's been worth, getting through that, and kind of moving on from it. So there's still hope, is what I'm kind of getting at, even though that was a very difficult and serious time for you.
Did learn a lot about people through it. Like, sure, it's a really shitty experience. It's a really shitty childhood, growing up poor, getting bullied in school, all this other stuff. But it made me grow as a person much faster than my peers. I had a much more mature view of life, such that most of the teachers around me didn't understand why I was so much more mature than my classmates when it came to, understanding advanced topics in psychology, or wanting to do this advanced thing in math, or wanting to talk to them about, their livelihoods and careers, rather than going outside and playing recess. Like, I was a lot more focused on the future and getting out of where I was than sitting there wallowing in it. Now, had it continued, I may have given up. I don't know. But it definitely changed me as a person for the better in the end. But I also do a lot of self-reflection a lot of the time. And when I have these bad experiences like this, even now, I have to sit and mull on it and figure out, what is the silver lining on all of this? What can I take from this? How can I improve my future self from what I have learned in this, horrendous experience?
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't see really any other way to live.
When after all of that happened, and you kind of starting life in a new junior high, going through high school, things are looking up. You're making a few friends, at least more than you had at the last place. Kind of stick to your nerdy ways. Were there any things in high school you did that were outside of like the academic, any sports, any clubs, or did you just kind of still just, that little library book kid that just stuck to himself? How would you describe, like, from that point on, like, where did you go in school?
So I had a major life event happen while I was in junior high, my 8th grade year. When I was 14, I had a major surgery because I had scoliosis. I mean, I still do. It's not, you don't exactly get rid of scoliosis, but, for anyone who doesn't know what that is where your spine is curved. And in most cases, it's very minor. A lot of people have scoliosis, a lot of them don't even know it. But in major cases, it can continue to advance. And in mine continued to advance well into my teens, to the point that a nurse started to notice it during a physical check and said, you need to go see the doctor. And the doctor said, well, we're going to send you to a specialist. And the specialist looked at my x-ray and said, you're one of the worst cases I've ever seen. You need to be operated on or you will die before you're 20. And so that was definitely a major point in my life, because that surgery is not a small one. And it involved them going in and putting in hardware in my spine, cutting a bunch of stuff open, and the recovery period for that was probably the better part of 2 years. I couldn't walk under my own power for 3 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I had to have help to do anything. And I couldn't go to school for, an entire semester. And even the semester after, people had to deliver homework to my house for me to do it. Like, I just missed the better part of about half a year of school. I had a similar experience happen while I was in kindergarten, actually. I had mono in my kindergarten year.
Ooh, you're kissing.
And that, I don't know. Like, it was a problem because I was the only person for like 100 miles who had mono that year, and no one knows where I got it from. Like, it was a point where the doctor had to report it to the CDC because he's like, there's a case of mono in our county and we don't know where it came from. And gosh, the funny thing is, I was just talking to my mother yesterday, and apparently my brother has mono now. Nobody knows where it came from either. So I don't know why we have mono in our family, but cool, I guess. But having the surgery, and I was basically bedridden for about 3 to 4 months. And for several months afterwards, I basically had to learn to walk again. I had to use a walker. I had to get around. I looked like an old lady for probably half a year. And that was hard because we're out in the country. I'm alone. I didn't have anybody to come visit. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. All I had was my GameCube and a television. And thank God we had satellite TV at that point, or I would have gone insane. I think I beat all my video games in that time period probably about 8 times. I could probably play Metroid Prime blindfolded at this point. But the other problem was the medicine that I had to take, because it was a very painful surgery and the recovery was very painful. So they had me on pain meds out the wazoo. Like, the doctors told me when I left the hospital that you are going to be addicted to Vicodin, and there's nothing we can do about it because of the amount that we have to give you.
Oh, wow.
For you to be able to not be in screaming pain all the time. And I was like, that medicine screwed me up because it gave me insomnia to the point that I only slept an hour a day.
Wow.
I was awake for 23 hours a day for 3 months straight. that does stuff to you. So all I had to keep me company was the TV. And at the only time, most channels were running reruns half the time. So the only channel that I really ever watched was either Cartoon Network or the Discovery Channel, or at the time, G4 was still on air. And if you don't know what G4 is, at the time period, it was a kind of a TV channel that was all about games and gamers and technology and stuff. So they would have things like Attack of the Show, which was a talk show every day where they would bring up the new latest advances in games, tech, whatever, and it was really fun. It was for nerds by nerds. But it exposed me to the world that I couldn't have where I lived, because being surrounded by farms, cornfields, whatnot, computers weren't a thing. We had a computer at our house, but it could barely run Microsoft Word, much less anything I could play on it. And we had the internet, but it was dial-up. We had dial-up till I was like 16. And at that point, DSL had already been out for like 6 or 7 years at that point.
So for anybody watching that's younger, like dial-up, you would call in to the internet and your computer would make this awful screeching noise. And if anybody picked up the phone while you were on the internet, it would also be screeching at you. You couldn't call anybody out because somebody was on the internet. Did you guys have that problem as a family where it was just like you had to share your internet with your phone?
That and more, because my dad was often on call. Well, my stepdad was often on call, so the phone line had to be open. So there was just, weeks where I just couldn't use the internet because we had to be able to answer the phone at a moment's notice. And cell phones weren't a thing yet, really, in the area. We had some towers that were starting to be a thing, but we couldn't afford them. And so my only really occupation was the TV at that point. And it exposed me to this world that I couldn't have. And it was always the world like, they would be showing E3. They would be showing PAX. They would be showing, the Microsoft conference. They would be showing all this cool Xbox stuff that was coming out at the time. They would show, Nintendo stuff. They would interview game developers. They would interview all these other cool people in tech. And it just lit the spark in me that's like, man, I wish I could be there. I wish I could be doing that stuff. I wish I could be in this world where everything seems to be so cool and on the bleeding edge of technology. And that was the only thing that really kept me going at that time, was the hope that the future was going to be better. And that by that point, I had friends, I had schoolmates, I had stuff that kept me happy. The bullying had mostly stopped by that point, at least on the regular. And there was still the occasional person that would come out and steal my car keys and then go start my truck in the parking lot at school and just leave it running for 6 hours until the principal came out and discovered my truck running during class. It was like, why did you leave your truck running? Just random stuff like this that would go on. But, it was fine. It wasn't what I had in elementary school. I could deal with it by that point. But that surgery, leaving me bedridden for that long, the only thing that I could do after that point during my recovery was the doctor came to me and he's like, well, I can either send you to physical therapy for 3 more years or you can run cross country. Your choice. So that was my sport. I started to run cross country. Wasn't by choice. Didn't want to do it. But I also didn't want to do physical therapy for much longer because that sucks. So I got exposed to the world of...
Explain that to me, because so you went from having scoliosis and a major surgery where you couldn't even walk afterwards to then being expected to do cross country. Like, I can't imagine you were the quickest runner on the team.
Oh, no. I was not the quickest runner on the team. In fact, for 5 years straight, I was the absolute worst runner in the entire Western Indiana Conference. For 5 years straight, every single race, I was the worst person. I had the worst time. I think probably my best 5K time before like the very end of my senior year of high school, my absolute best time was 24 minutes. That was like the last race I ever did. But until like that race, my best time was 28 minutes, which when running a 5K in the high school level, that's incredibly slow. Like, you can almost walk that. And I think my first race was 55 minutes. It was terrible. I did not have the stamina to do it. My muscles were still rebuilding. And content warning if you're squeamish. But to describe the surgery that I had in more detail, I would turn away now if you don't want any blood and gore. But they had to break all of my ribs. They had to graft bone off of my hips to put it onto my spinal column so that they could make room to bolt it in place. And then attach 2 giant titanium rods that run the length of my spine so that they could halt the progress of my spine so that it wouldn't grow into my lungs and kill me. So that was not a minor surgery.
No, and I am a little squeamish, and that was very detailed.
You're welcome. But, I mean, that's just the fact that I had to live with, was that my body was still rebuilding at that point. And even though I was still a kid, that takes a lot out of you. And it gave me a great appreciation for people that, have these physical conditions their whole life. I only had to deal with it for a few years before I was mostly to the point that I was functioning normally again. But that was the cross country, was to rebuild my endurance, my body. Before I started doing it, I couldn't walk for more than 10 minutes at a time. School was actually hard to get around. So I had both that to deal with, the social isolation of being alone for a year and a half, and the fact that I couldn't progress in my schooling anymore. I was really depressed. I had suddenly lost all of my coping strategies, and that was not fun. But it made me grow as a person. You have a lot to think about when you're alone with your thoughts for a year and a half. And I understand why people in solitary confinement in prison go insane. Because I was slowly getting there.
So, but you made it through,
I did make it through.
You still have the scoliosis. You still deal with that, I take it. That kind of a surgery just doesn't go away.
I still have problems at the airport. The metal in my spine will go off under a metal detector if it's strong enough. And that problem does not go away. I will be dealing with this for the rest of my life, and pray to God that the machinery never breaks and that it doesn't ever get worse. So, but it does leave me with the inability, I can't lift more than 50 pounds. I can, but I'm going to hurt myself doing it. And I still can't stand in place for more than 20 minutes at a time. If I'm not walking, I can't stand there very long. I have to keep moving around. And because of the cross country, I also injured my ankles several times to the point that I have weak ankles now. So it's this kind of 1-2 punch of can't stand there, can't walk for a long period of time, can't lift things. And I mean, I'm basically disabled in that matter. Sure, I can still move around. Sure, I can move normally, but I don't have the endurance of a normal person. And a lot of the things that regular people can do, I just can't. Even when I'm fursuiting, I have to take a lot of breaks.
So you are essentially the bionic raccoon.
I am Rocket Raccoon. If you see the first Guardians movie in the prison scene where you see him take off his shirt, that's what my back looks like. I have giant scars. It's crazy.
But you survived. Hit my mic. But you survived. You went through all of that. You got through high school. As you were going through all this, at what point did you discover the furry fandom? And did that have any impact at first? Describe just kind of your intro to discovering what furry was, or what it was to you at that point of your life.
So the only reason that I found furry in the first place was because my kinks finally awakened. Kind of when I was 18, I was a really late bloomer, and at the time, we had sex education in school, but we didn't have sex education in school. There was lots of talk about it, but other than that class, no one would ever talk about it. At my home life, we never talked about the birds and the bees ever. There was no, it was a very Catholic household. I grew up Catholic, and there was no talk about sex. You just don't talk about it. And to the point that I never heard my parents doing it. it was just, there was no discussion of it whatsoever. So I was very clueless. So when my kinks first awoke and I started having, I guess, arousal for the first time, you could say, I didn't know what was happening. I had no clue. And I was concerned that something was wrong with my body. I didn't know what was going on. So I did what I normally do when I don't understand something. I went to the library and picked up books and figured out very quickly that, oh, this is a normal bodily process. Why didn't no one ever tell me about this? And at that point, the kinks started to kind of deepen and I started to explore them a bit, but I was also still very ashamed of them because there was definitely that stigma being raised Catholic that, this is bad, sex, you go do it with another lady after you married her, other than that, nothing, abstinent forever. And even thinking a dirty thought, you're going to die in hell. Like, it's just, and my kinks weren't to do with other people. Like, it wasn't like I was lusting after people or trying to look at naked things and whatnot. They're very innocuous. I mean, I guess I can talk about them if you want
go
to.
ahead.
But so my first kink, very weird, but it's kind of the thought of having too many balloons. Like, say you see a car dealership and you see the giant balloon displays they have going by it. Well, I would try to drive by that and suddenly find it very hard to drive by that. And
so was this like was this your first experience with some kind of like an attraction or arousal, like driving just by a car dealership with a lot of balloons and that just snapped something in your head and you're like, oh?
Yes, that was the absolute first experience ever. Like, we would watch movies all the time. Like, me and my friends, we'd watch like all these crazy like rated R movies, and I had no feeling whatsoever watching it. But by God, I drive by the car dealership and they got a 20-foot balloon up there, and I'm like, I feel something. This is weird. And it was just so strange to deal with that. Having no experience, no one to talk to about it. I couldn't tell my parents, that was for sure. It's not like I could talk to anybody at church about it. I didn't dare mention it to another kid at school because, oh my God, that would be the recipe for disaster. And I mean, there wasn't any kind of counselor I could talk to about it. I definitely couldn't talk to my doctor about it because he would blab it to my parents. And so I had to discover what it was on my own. I mean, I'm sure that's true for a lot of people, but I also didn't really have the resources to do it until we had the internet at a decent speed.
So you kind of had this cocktail of being raised and experiencing bullying, but then also being in a Catholic faith in a generally conservative area where there was a lot of shame attached to it. That's just a big mix of, I can't talk about this with anyone. And like, how does that affect you?
Yeah.
Like, how does that affect your confidence? Just how you felt about yourself growing up?
It made me live a double life, more or less. Like, there was no one I could interact with this, so I had to keep it to myself. So there would be the part of me that would go out every day and, be a normal person, quote, quote. And then I would be at home, like, trying to research, well, why did this kink happen? What is this? Why am I experiencing this? What could have done this to me? Is it bad? Is it good? Like, are there other people like this? Is there historical evidence for these things? Like, what's the psychology behind this? I was very curious and inquisitive about it. But then I would go to church on Sunday and hear hellfire preaching about, various stories in the Bible about people having, random acts of sex out of marriage and getting smote by God. Like, it's just, there was a lot of shame behind it. So it kept me from really ever trying to talk about it to anyone. And then when I started to discover communities like this on the internet, that's when it really opened my eyes to go, whoa, there's whole other people dealing with this. And while it wasn't yet furry stuff, the whole kink scene, eventually I ran into stories on like fanfiction.net when I was searching for random, stuff to read that involved, like balloons or whatnot. Because, I mean, at that point I had kind of accepted, well, I have this thing, I might as well enjoy it. When I wasn't feeling ashamed of it, there was always that flip-flop mood of, well, I enjoy this. And then there was, the next day it's like, oh my God, I can't do this. Why am I ever like this? I need to get rid of this. You would flip flop around between them. And so I eventually found a story that mentioned, furry stuff. And I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of this before. So I went to look on the internet about it. And that's when I found, tons of other people who experienced the same sorts of kinks. And I'm like, whoa, what is all this? And, that's when the seeds from like Pokemon and Digimon started to come to fruition. Because while they didn't influence me in that direction, they certainly made it more amicable to it. So I'm like, this persona thing sounds pretty cool. This stuff where all these people are doing this kink kind of openly on the internet, I'd never seen anything like that before. And I had no preconceived notion that this was bad. I had never been part of the nerd culture that was like, ugh, very bad, or anything to that point. I never inhabited those scenes because it was so negative that I didn't want to be there. So I came into the fandom without any kind of preconceived notion and said, I guess I'll make a persona. And so that's Chaotic. I mean, he's been through a couple iterations so far, but he's still relatively the same as when I first created him. It was 2008. Jesus Christ.
But that's super impressive, though, that you still have, like, most people, I don't think, in the fandom can say that their very first persona back in 2008 is what they still have today.
The only difference between this and original Chaotic is that original Chaotic has the regular colors of a raccoon, doesn't have the weird, like, highlights in my hair, and his eyes were, like, black, or not black, but like a brown or gray or something. I don't quite remember. And he wore, jean shorts. That was it. That was the only difference. It's still basically the same. I got a little bit better coloring, and I got some cool hair. That's about it.
That's awesome.
I have made, a couple other characters since then, but this is still who I am. He has grown with me over the years.
On that note, though, we'll go ahead and stop this segment of the podcast. We'll pick back up, and we've got post-high school life to talk about with Chaotic, more furry shenanigans from here. We'll talk a little bit more about like how autism, ADHD has impacted your life, maybe like how you handle work and stuff like that. But we'll go ahead. Things to look forward to on the next podcast episode. Again, if you liked what you watched, if you enjoyed this kind of content, please like and subscribe on the channel. And with that, we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye.